So, let's talk about investment stewardship. We're going to cut right through the jargon and get into why this is so much more than a box-ticking exercise. This is about real, active ownership, the kind that actually drives results. We're moving from high-level principles to what this looks like in practice and, asking the really tough questions about how we even measure if it's working.
Okay, so first things first, let's get on the same page with a really solid definition. At its core, stewardship is simply about using influence, an investor's voice, their vote, to maximize long-term value. And notice, this isn't just about the company's profit next quarter. It's way bigger than that. It's about protecting the value of the shared systems, the economic, social, and environmental assets that, let's be honest, all of our returns depend on in the long run.
Here's the game plan for our deep dive today. We'll kick off with the why, what I'm calling the stewardship imperative. Then we'll get into the real nitty-gritty, its purpose, the benefits, and yes, some very real limitations. We'll also look at the frameworks that keep everyone honest, and then explore how this engagement actually gets done on the ground. And finally, we'll tie it all together. Sound good? Let's jump in.
All right, so let's start with that foundational question. Why has active ownership suddenly become such a critical part of any serious investment strategy? Why now?
And here's the answer, right here. This is the absolute core of it. Stewardship isn't some extra optional activity. It's not a nice to have. It is a direct consequence of owning a piece of a company. If you're managing money for other people, pension funds, university endowments, anyone, you have what's called a fiduciary duty. And that's a powerful legal and ethical mandate to act in their best long-term interests. You simply can't fulfill that duty by sitting on the sidelines. You have to be an active, engaged owner. Period.
So what is stewardship actually trying to accomplish? We're about to break down its goals, and then we'll look at a really fantastic, real-world example of stewardship in action. And after that, we'll get real about the things that can stop it from working.
You can see the purpose is really multi-layered, but it's all connected. It's about nudging companies, sometimes shoving them, towards strategies that create real, sustainable value over the long haul. This means making sure the company's path aligns with the people who actually own it, the beneficiaries. And crucially, it's about making sure the engagement process leads to tangible positive changes, not just a series of polite meetings.
Now, theory is one thing, but to see how this really works, let's dig into a classic case study. This one involves a company called Six Continents. Some of you might remember it by its old name, Bass plc, the famous brewing giant.
This is just a perfect illustration of how stewardship goes from talk to action. Look at how clear and specific these objectives were. The investors wanted to untangle this massive, complicated conglomerate. That meant selling off the historic beer business to really focus on hotels. They pushed the company to give cash back to shareholders instead of just sitting on it. They demanded better governance, like splitting the all-powerful combined chair and CEO role. And they put a stop to acquisitions that were just killing value. The result? It wasn't just a happier board. It was a leaner, more profitable company that delivered huge returns for its owners.
But, this case study also really shows the two sides of the stewardship coin. On the one hand, the upside is massive. You can literally create shareholder value, fix how a company is run, and get its strategy pointed in the right direction. But it's not always so easy. For it to work, you often need a pretty big ownership stake to even get the company's attention. You need to have a real, high-quality dialogue. And let's be frank, your influence is pretty limited if there's no credible threat of just selling your shares if they don't listen. It takes a lot of time and resources.
Okay, so if this is so important, but also so challenging, how do we make sure it's actually being done responsibly and effectively? Well, that's exactly where formal frameworks come into the picture. Let's take a look at the codes and standards that provide the guardrails.
This quote right here, it's a gut punch. It comes from a report digging into the 2008 global financial crisis. And what it's saying is that there was a massive failure of ownership. Investors just passively accepted the insane risks that banks were taking on. This realization was a huge wake-up call, and it was the catalyst for creating the first formal stewardship codes, which were designed to make sure owners would never be that asleep at the wheel again.
A perfect example of these frameworks in action is the UK's Stewardship Code, which got a massive update in 2020. This is not just a checklist, it's a really comprehensive set of principles. It forces investors to first look in the mirror at their own purpose and culture. Then, it lays out super clear expectations for the practical stuff, how you monitor companies, how you engage, how you collaborate with other investors, and, critically, what you do when talks break down and you need to escalate things.
But the single most important, game-changing evolution in that 2020 code is this one word right here, outcomes. This was a fundamental shift. It's not good enough anymore to just have a thoughtful policy written down somewhere. Now, investors have to report on the activities they did and, this is the crucial part, the tangible results those activities actually delivered for their clients.
So what does this look like day to day? How is this work actually getting done inside these big investment firms? Let's break down the different ways you can set up an engagement strategy.
Yeah, there's definitely no one-size-fits-all model here. Investors have a few different options. Some build out these big, dedicated in-house teams of stewardship specialists. Others believe it's the portfolio managers, the people making the buy and sell decisions, who should lead the charge. You also see firms outsourcing the work to specialists, and in some cases, the asset owners themselves, like the big pension funds, take the lead directly.
And each of these models comes with its own trade-offs, right? An in-house team gives you deep expertise, but it's expensive. Having the portfolio manager lead it ensures the engagement is directly tied to the investment case, but those managers might not have the time or the specific skill set. Outsourcing gives you access to specialists, but you might lose that close connection to the investment team. The right choice really just depends on an investor's size, their philosophy, and what they're trying to achieve.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together now and really land on the key takeaway from this whole deep dive into active ownership.
So if there is just one thing you remember from this, it should be this. Modern stewardship has grown up. It's moved way beyond good intentions. The entire field is now judged on its results. It's all about drawing a clear, undeniable line from the actions an investor takes to the value that's created or protected for the people whose money they manage. It's about turning that abstract principle into concrete practice.
And that brings us right to the big, forward-looking question, the next frontier, really. As stewardship just becomes a standard, expected part of the investment process, the challenge changes. It's not about if we should be doing it anymore. It's about how well we're doing it. So how do we evolve the metrics? How do we prove the true long-term impact of all this work? Answering that is the next great challenge for active ownership.